"Why does that Apache child trust you?" she asked, and the stranger finally looked afraid. They thought he was kidnapping the boy. 3 men rushed him, ready to tie him down. But then the child ran straight into his arms, clinging to him and crying so hard his whole body shook. And that was the moment the new school teacher asked the question that made the stranger's face change color. That afternoon in Rose Canyon was unlike any other. The sun wasn't blazing the way it usually did. Instead, the sky looked hazy, tinged with the faint gray of distant ash drifting from the San Pedro Range. People still walked the main dirt road, but no one expected something strange to unfold right in the middle of town. A small Apache boy, maybe 7 years old, thin and terrified, came sprinting down the road as if something was chasing him. The elders stepped aside quickly. A few mothers pulled their children closer. Their whispers mixed fear with unease. And then the man appeared behind him. He was tall, lean but solid. His shirt was stained with red dust, jeans worn pale with age, boots scuffed at the toes. His hair, the color of dry sand, was tousled by wind. At first glance, he looked like any ranch hand drifting along the borderlands. But his eyes were not ordinary. They were deep, still, carrying something the townspeople were not used to seeing in a white man's face. A calmness shaped like stone, something very much like the quiet gaze of the Apache who lived in the northern valleys. The child saw him, froze for a second, then ran again, but this time toward the man. That was the moment 3 men from the saloon jumped to the worst conclusion. The stranger must be chasing the boy to snatch him. No one asked a question. No one checked. They reacted like instinct. "Grab him!" someone shouted. The stranger had no idea what was happening. The 3 men lunged. He raised his hands, dodging more than resisting. He did not want to fight. Something in his eyes said that clearly, but the misunderstanding grew by the second. Everything stopped only when the boy burst into tears. He threw himself at the stranger, locking his arms around the man's leg like he had finally reached the only safe place in the world. The street went silent. The men stopped. The only sound left was the wind rattling the rusty sign above the general store. At that moment, someone approached from the far end of the road. The new school teacher, Evelyn Hart. A young woman around 30, soft brown hair, a pale blue dress still dusty from the morning train ride. She had just been assigned to Rose Canyon School that week, a newcomer in a town where people guarded their trust tightly. She did not understand what she was walking into, but she saw one thing clearly. The child was not afraid of the stranger. He was hiding in him. Evelyn stepped closer, cautious but not frightened. She knelt beside the boy and placed a gentle hand on his back. Hey, easy now. Are you all right?" The child sobbed harder but didn't let go of the man. Evelyn lifted her eyes to the stranger. "Did you do something to him?" The man exhaled and shook his head. "No, he ran to me first." "You know him?" she asked. He hesitated. "I don't know." Evelyn frowned. "What does that mean?" "He's holding on to you like family." At that moment, the boy whispered something, a string of fast, sharp sounds that didn't resemble English at all. Evelyn didn't understand it, but the man did. He tilted his head slightly and answered in the same language, with the same rhythm and tone, as if they shared a tongue no one else in Rose Canyon had ever heard. Gasps broke across the street. "Oh, Lord help us. He speaks Apache." How does a white man know that? Who is he? Evelyn didn't look away from him. She wasn't driven by fear or anger. She simply observed him, calmly, sharply. She looked straight into his eyes and saw something buried deep there, something like a fear he had been hiding for a long time. A fear not of being hit, but of being recognized. Finally, she asked the question that made the stranger's face go pale. "Why does that Apache child trust you?" And for the first time since he'd appeared, the man actually stepped back. Fear flickered in his eyes, real and unguarded. Evelyn's question hit him like an arrow straight into the place he had spent years trying to bury. The man, who she would later learn was named Calder Reeves, didn't answer right away. He glanced around, searching for a way out, some gap in the ring of curious eyes gathering around him. But the late afternoon in Rose Canyon offered him no escape. Everyone stood still, holding their breath, waiting to hear what he would say. The Apache boy was still clinging to his pant leg, tears streaking down his dusty face. He held on to Calder the way a drowning child grabs the last piece of driftwood. Evelyn softened her voice. "You don't have to say anything you don't want to. But that child is scared. If you know how to calm him, please do." Calder crouched down and rested a hand on the boy's shoulder. He spoke a few quiet words in that same unfamiliar language. His voice was low and warm, like wind settling before a storm. And just like that, the boy stopped crying. He inhaled shakily, then slipped his hand into Calder's. No one in that town had ever seen anything like it. An Apache child choosing a white man for safety, clinging to him without hesitation, like letting go meant danger. The silence that followed was the heavy kind only small towns know. Thick, tense, full of old prejudice. Calder stood, eyes conflicted. Finally, he said quietly, "I didn't take him. I wasn't chasing him. I saw him running and crying, so I followed to see if I could help." One of the men from the saloon growled, "Then why's he holding you like kin?" Calder looked straight at the man. "I don't know. I don't know why he came to me. I just know he was scared." Evelyn stepped in quickly, sensing the situation tightening around Calder. "If no one can help, then please let me take him to the temporary classroom at the church. At least he can sit down and drink some water." She said it because she saw how close Calder was to being cornered. A white man speaking Apache in 1952, that alone was enough to spark suspicion. Calder nodded, exhaling as if someone had lifted a stone from his chest. He picked the child up, not like a father would, more like someone who understood exactly how to hold an Apache child without frightening him. That detail didn't slip past Evelyn. It wasn't the movement of a stranger. It was the movement of someone who had held Apache children before. Evelyn walked beside him and lowered her voice. "You truly don't know him?" Calder shook his head. "I don't know his name, but..." He hesitated. "But what?" Evelyn asked. "But I know his voice." That answer made Evelyn pause mid-step. This man spoke their language, soothed their children, and now claimed to recognize the voice of a child he had never met. He was hiding something. When they reached the church, the half-hour bell chimed overhead, softening the air a little. Evelyn opened the door and ushered them inside, away from all the staring eyes. The small room was warmer than outside, sunlight catching in the dust motes drifting through the window. She handed the boy a cup of water, then sat across from Calder. He remained standing, stiff, as if walls made him uneasy. Evelyn spoke again, her voice gentle but sharp enough to cut through any lie. "You speak Apache. The child trusts you, and now you say you recognize his voice. Do you understand why I need an answer?" Calder braced his hands on the back of a chair and lowered his head. His voice shook slightly, not from fear of her, but from fear of whatever truth he was about to bring back into the world. "I understand." Then, Evelyn drew a breath. "Who are you, Calder Reeves?" He lifted his eyes. For the first time since she saw him, he didn't hide the fear flickering there. He swallowed hard. Then he said, "I lived for 10 years in an Apache band that isn't marked on any map. I was the only white man there. The chief saved my life." Evelyn's eyes widened. Calder took another breath, his next words almost a whisper. "On that boy who ran to me. He sounds exactly like his father." His voice cracked on the last word, and in that moment, Evelyn understood. This wasn't an accident. This was a past chasing a man who had tried desperately to outrun it. Evelyn barely had time to react before the Apache boy tugged on Calder's sleeve. He spoke a long, trembling stream of words in his tribal language. Calder crouched down to listen, his face tightening with every sentence. He nodded once, then again, then fell completely silent. Evelyn didn't understand a word, but she knew whatever the boy said held weight, and maybe danger. Finally, Calder exhaled sharply, resting one hand on the child's shoulder. "Are you sure?" The boy nodded hard. Evelyn watched them. This was not the silence of two strangers. She stepped closer. "What did he say?" Calder hesitated, weighing whether it was wise to tell her. But hiding it was pointless now. "He said his father's been missing for 3 days, and he believes I'm the only one who can find him." Evelyn blinked. "Why you?" Calder looked down at his dust-covered boots, voice turning low and rough. "Because his father once saved my life. He pulled me out of a flooded creek, nursed me through fever, taught me their language, taught me to ride, taught me to survive." He paused, swallowing hard. "He told me once, if anything ever happened to his son, the boy could come to me." Evelyn felt something shift inside her. It made sense now. Why the child clung to Calder as though he were the last steady thing in the world. Calder wasn't just a familiar face. He was a promise. She knelt beside the boy, speaking softly. "What kind of man was his father?" Calder closed his eyes for a long moment. "A good one. A man who taught me courage isn't about fighting. It's about protecting someone weaker than you. He was the only one up there who didn't treat me like an outsider." Evelyn looked at the boy holding his cup of water with both hands. "So, what does he want you to do?" "He wants me to go back with him," Calder said. "Back to the place I left years ago." Evelyn heard the fear beneath his words. Not fear of the Apache, not fear of the town's judgment, but fear of everything waiting for him in the past. But it wasn't over yet. Suddenly, the boy rushed to the window and tugged Evelyn's arm. He pointed outside, speaking quickly, his voice sharp with panic. Calder spun around. He followed the boy's finger, and his whole body tensed. Outside, the same 3 men from earlier now stood with a few more beside them. One of them held a rope. Evelyn lowered her voice. "They're looking for you." Calder's jaw tightened. "I know." Evelyn felt her heartbeat spike. "They still think you kidnapped him. If they come in here, I won't fight them," Calder said immediately. "If I do, it gets worse." Evelyn shook her head. "If you don't explain, they won't hear you anyway." The Apache boy grabbed Calder's sleeve again, speaking in quick bursts. Calder leaned down to listen, then translated for her. "He says those men yelled at him and scared him. He ran away from them. If they see him in here, they'll think I hit him." The situation was unraveling fast. Evelyn looked around the small room, trying to think. But the boy made the first move. He ran to Calder, wrapped both arms around him, and buried his face in Calder's shirt, as if hiding inside him. Calder froze, not with fear, but with something deeper. He laid a hand on the child's back, gentle and protective. Memories flickered behind his eyes, memories of that boy's father holding him the same way when he was delirious with fever. Evelyn watched them, her chest tightening. She finally understood why the child chose him. To this boy, Calder wasn't just a stranger. He was safety. Evelyn stood, walked to the door. Calder startled. "What are you doing?" "I'm going to talk to them," she said. "Sheila, they won't listen," Calder warned. "I'm the newcomer in town," Evelyn replied, "which means I'm not controlled by their prejudices yet." And with that, she opened the door and stepped outside. The sky had darkened into a heavy dusk, the kind that feels like a storm waiting for its cue. The men turned when they saw her. One asked, "Teacher, is that man inside? What about the kid?" Evelyn stood tall, her voice calm in a way that made a few of them stiffen. "The boy wasn't kidnapped. He ran looking for safety, and the man you want to tie up is the one he chose to protect him." No one spoke. One man frowned. "You sure?" Evelyn held his gaze. "I've taught children for years. A child always runs toward the person who makes them feel safe." The street fell silent. The sentence made a few men shift uncomfortably. Others gripped the rope tighter. Evelyn knew she'd just stepped into a fight she might not win. But she didn't step back. Because when she saw Calder's eyes in that room, worried, frightened, but still focused on protecting the boy, she knew he wasn't the monster the town imagined. And because when the boy clung to Calder, she saw something the town refused to see. The loneliness of a man who had no home, and the fragile hope of a child who chose him anyway. The air outside the church tightened like a pulled wire. The men of Rose Canyon, long used to throwing their weight around, suddenly found themselves blocked by a schoolteacher who had lived in town for less than a week. They looked unsettled, but none of them wanted to be the first to back down. Evelyn stood firm. She didn't tremble, though Calder saw the slight tension in her shoulders, the kind that comes from someone using every ounce of courage to defend what is right even when she isn't sure she will win. A bearded man, Joe Branson, spoke first. "Ma'am, with all due respect, you just got here. You don't know what the Apache are like. That kid could have been told to lie to us." Evelyn didn't blink. "You think a 7-year-old child can orchestrate something like this?" Joe faltered for a moment, then forced a defensive shrug. "Not all of it, maybe, but he could have been told." Evelyn cut in before he could build momentum. "He's scared. He's shaking. His feet are red from running all the way across the ridge. Look at him." The crowd turned toward the church window. Through the glass, they could see the Apache boy clinging tightly to Calder's sleeve, gripping him like the last safe place on earth. That truth alone softened a few faces, but stubbornness still lingered. A young man named Roy spoke up. "Fine, but why him? Why choose that guy? He's a stranger." Evelyn looked back at Calder. He stood slightly behind her, silent, as if the weight of so many eyes made it hard to breathe. She realized she couldn't answer for him this time. She leaned toward him and whispered, "You have to speak. They won't stop unless they hear it from you." Calder inhaled slowly. He didn't like putting himself on display, especially in front of people so quick to judge. But if he stayed silent, the boy's safety, and his own, would crumble. He stepped forward beside Evelyn. The boy's hand remained wrapped in his sleeve. That small detail made the crowd fall quiet for a brief, startling moment. Calder spoke, slow and careful. Years ago, when I was in my early 20s, I got lost in a storm up in the northern mountains. I fell into a creek and hit my head on the rocks. I would have died. An Apache band found me. They didn't leave me there. They saved me. He paused. I lived with them for nearly 10 years. I learned their language. They taught me everything. How to find water in the rocks, how to read a trail, how to live with more kindness than anyone in this town ever taught me. A few men stiffened at that, but none dared interrupt. Evelyn stood beside him, silent support written all over her face. Calder continued, voice lower. The boy's father was the man who saved my life. I owe him a debt I can never repay. Roy asked, so what does the kid want? Calder looked at the boy, then back at the crowd. He doesn't want anything except help. His father has been missing for 3 days. He believes I'm the only one who will keep the promise his father trusted me with. Murmurs rippled through the group. Joe Branson lowered his eyes like someone ashamed of what he'd assumed, but suspicion wasn't gone yet. Another man called out, even if that's true, why would he trust you more than his own people? You're white. They're Apache. The question shattered the short-lived calm. Evelyn glanced at Calder, unsure what he would say. After a long breath, he answered with a quiet sadness that silenced everyone. Because I was once a child just like him. The wind swept through the street, lifting red dust into the air. It drifted down like slow-falling ash. Calder went on, voice heavy. I was lost from my family. I was doubted by white folks and never accepted by the Apache. I know what that feels like. And his father chose to trust me before I even knew how to trust anyone. The tone in the crowd shifted. People stared at the ground or at each other, struggling with the weight of what he said. Evelyn felt something twist inside her, a pull toward the quiet pain in his voice, toward the man who carried scars no one here had ever bothered to see. But the moment of softness didn't last. From down the road, a plume of dust rose. Hoofbeats thundered closer. A group of riders was coming in fast. A woman gasped. Apache riders, God help us, they're coming. Evelyn turned to Calder. His face had gone pale. They're here for their child, he said softly, or for the body of their missing chief. A cold shiver crawled up Evelyn's spine. Not because the Apache were riding in, but because she understood something far more frightening. Calder Reeves was about to face the past he had been running from for years. And she, a newcomer with nothing but conviction to her name, was standing right in the middle of the storm with him. The red dust cloud grew larger until 6 Apache riders emerged, galloping straight into the center of Rose Canyon. They didn't shout, they didn't draw weapons, they didn't raise bows, yet their silence frightened the townspeople far more than any battle cry. The Apache rarely entered town without a reason, and everyone understood that whatever their reason was today, it wasn't good. The horses stopped in front of the church. Inside, the Apache boy trembled and ducked halfway behind Calder, like a small bird seeking shelter from the wind. Calder placed his hand gently on the child's head, steadying him. The Apache warriors scanned the street before their eyes finally locked onto Calder. The moment hit like a stone. The man in front, older, with tribal markings across his face, stepped forward. He studied Calder from head to toe, as if confirming his identity. Calder lowered his head in respect. The older man spoke in Apache, his voice deep and resonant like a drum in the heart of the mountain. Calder answered him in the same tongue. Evelyn stood right beside him, understanding none of it, but recognizing one thing clearly. These two men were speaking not as enemies, but as people who shared history. The exchange lasted only a minute, but for the tense town, it felt like an hour. Then the Apache leader turned toward Evelyn, whom he had never met. Instead of hostility, he dipped his head in a polite gesture. The courtesy stunned the townspeople. Evelyn returned a soft nod, though she felt the sheer weight of the moment pressing on her shoulders. When the warriors coaxed the child outside, he still wouldn't release Calder's sleeve. Only after Calder reassured him 3 times did the boy finally step forward. The townspeople stepped aside, forming a path. For the first time, Evelyn realized how silent Rose Canyon could be. Even the wind against the post office sign seemed louder. The older warrior looked around the street, then spoke in English, his accent heavy but clear. "We are here to find our chief," Evelyn gently asked. "The boy's father is still missing?" He nodded. "He left our shelter 3 days ago to hunt and look for fresh water. He did not return. We searched the northern range, but the wind covered most tracks." Calder swallowed. Evelyn saw guilt flicker across his face, even though this wasn't his fault. The warrior fixed his gaze on Calder. The chief's son ran away. He fled because he heard the adults arguing. He believes the only one who can find his father is you. The town turned its eyes on Calder again. This time it wasn't suspicion, but something more complicated. A recognition that this quiet outsider, neither fully one of them nor fully Apache, held a connection no one else did. The warrior continued, "You lived among us for many years. You can read the land. You know the northern mountains. If anyone can find him, it is you." Evelyn watched the conflict building behind Calder's eyes. He wanted to refuse. He wanted to stay hidden from the past he had tried so hard to escape. But the Apache boy tugged on his sleeve with a pleading look that broke through every wall he had built. Evelyn whispered, "Calder, do you want to go?" He looked at her. A long pause followed, filled with fear, exhaustion, and something deeper, something Evelyn didn't dare name. Finally, he said, "I have to go." Evelyn asked, "What do you need?" Calder shook his head. "You don't need to be part of this," she answered immediately. "I already am." Her words shook him. The Apache leader glanced at Evelyn with a measured respect, an expression rarely offered to any townswoman. He said, "The chief's son trusts this man, and this woman has chosen to stand beside him. That means we will not treat her as an enemy." A few townspeople sucked in sharp breaths. Evelyn felt dozens of surprised eyes burning into her back. Calder leaned closer, voice low. "Schoolteacher, this isn't simple. If his father was taken or dead," Evelyn finished softly. "I know. But if you go alone, you take nothing but fear. If you go with someone, you take strength." Calder studied her for a long moment. Then, for the first time all day, a faint, pained, but genuine smile touched his lips. "You're braver than I thought." "I'm just doing what's right," Evelyn said. But deep inside, she knew it wasn't only that. Something about him, the quiet sorrow, the way he held the child, the way he carried wounds he never spoke of, pulled her toward him instead of pushing her away. The Apache leader lifted an arm toward the mountains. "If you go, you must go before dark. The later it gets, the harder the trail will be." Evelyn looked at Calder. Calder looked at the boy, and in that single moment, Evelyn understood that she would follow him into the place where his past waited to call his name. They left Rose Canyon just as the sun touched the ridgeline, its gold stretching across the valley like a ribbon at the end of the day. Calder walked ahead, his eyes trained on the dry borderland terrain he knew too well. Evelyn stayed close behind with the Apache boy, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder to steady his pace. The 6 Apache warriors rode on both sides, silent, letting their horses move slowly as though they were listening to every shift in the wind. No one objected to Evelyn joining them, but each warrior watched her with a curious gaze. Not hostile, but not entirely trusting either. They had no idea why a town schoolteacher would willingly walk into danger. But Evelyn knew. Something inside her insisted Calder shouldn't face his past alone. Night fell faster than expected. Mountain wind swept in sharp and cold, carrying the scent of stone and brittle weeds. When they stopped near a narrow rock alcove to rest, Evelyn shivered. Calder noticed. He shrugged off his jacket and held it out. "Take it," he said. Evelyn shook her head. "You need it more." "I'm used to it," Calder replied, and draped it over her shoulders before she could argue. The jacket smelled of pine smoke and old campfires, the scent of a man who had lived far too long away from people. The Apache boy pressed against Calder's side, eyes fixed on the faint sparks drifting off the small fire. Evelyn watched them and asked quietly, "Did he tell you anything else?" Calder exhaled. He said when his father left, he took his trail knife. Apache knives are different from white men's hunting blades. If I find a cut on a tree trunk, I'll know whose it is. Evelyn thought for a moment. Then she asked what had lingered in her mind since they left the town. "Why did you leave the tribe? If you were that close to them, why live alone on the border?" Calder had been expecting that question and dreading it. He picked up a twig and turned it between his fingers. "Because I didn't belong there," he said slowly. "Even though they saved me, taught me everything, even though I loved them like family, I was still an outsider. A white man among the Apache, no matter how kind they were. I was always a guest." Evelyn nodded gently. "So you came back to the town to find somewhere you did belong?" Calder gave a humorless laugh. "No, I came back and realized I don't belong here either." The words hung in the darkness, heavier than the wind. Evelyn felt something tighten in her chest. "You've been that lonely?" she whispered. Calder didn't answer right away. He pushed the twig into the embers and watched the flame flare. "The chief's son, the boy sleeping next to me. He trusts me because his father once said I was someone who walked between two worlds. But I think neither world ever truly wanted me." Evelyn looked at him for a long moment, then said something so soft it felt like it reached the deepest part of him. "But the boy wants you." Calder looked down at the child. His expression shifted, the fear and self-doubt easing just enough to let a small light seep through. "Yeah," he murmured. "He does." They set out again under the high moon. The terrain changed gradually. Softer earth, patches of stone, bushes bent at strange angles. Calder stopped 3 times, each pause heavier than the last. The first time, he spotted the faint footprints of a grown man heading north. The second, he found mud smeared on the rough bark of a juniper, a trail mark Apache hunters often used. The third time, he went still, then dropped to one knee. Evelyn hurried to him. "What is it?" Calder didn't answer. He picked up a small wooden charm, carved with the shape of a claw. He gripped it as if afraid it might vanish. Evelyn touched his arm gently. "Calder, what is that?" His voice tightened. "It's the chief's amulet. He never took it off. If it's here..." Evelyn saw the color drain from his face. She held on to him a little harder. He could have dropped it. It doesn't have to mean the worst. Calder shook his head. The chief never dropped anything that belonged to his family. If he left it here, it means he was leaving a sign or calling for help. One of the Apache warriors approached, his expression carved from stone. "The chief's son was right," he said. "You are the only one who can read this." Calder stood. The mountain wind gusted so hard it sent Evelyn's hair whipping behind her. No one said it aloud, but everyone understood. They were close to something, close to the truth. Calder looked at Evelyn. Gratitude flickered through his eyes, mixed with the fear of her being drawn deeper into danger. But Evelyn only nodded. "I'm here. Keep going." Calder took a deep breath, tightened his grip on the amulet, and led the group farther into the mountain's shadow, toward whatever answers waited in the dark. They moved deeper into the mountains, until night was no longer dark blue but turned into pure ink. The moonlight faded, leaving only thin streaks of silver on rocks and sand like footprints left by the darkness itself. Calder walked in front, his breath mixing with the wind that slipped through narrow stone cracks like someone whispering. The Apache boy stayed close to Evelyn, watching Calder's shadow as if everything depended on it. When they reached a wide ravine carved into the earth like a giant wound, Calder stopped and knelt, placing his hand on the ground as if listening. A minute passed before he whispered, "Tracks. 3 people. One set belonged to the chief. The other 2 were white men." Fear tightened the group. Evelyn asked quietly, "What white men would come this far?" Calder answered, "Hunters, smugglers, or people looking for what they shouldn't." A warrior concluded, "Then they took him." But Calder wasn't convinced this was a murder trail. He explained that the tracks showed pauses, shifts, signs of someone trying to move downward carefully. "If they wanted him dead," he said, "there wouldn't be this pattern." The possibility that the chief might be injured hung in the air. Before anyone could speak more, the Apache boy tugged Calder's sleeve, whispering something urgent. Calder translated, "He hears something." Everyone froze. Then a faint metallic sound echoed against stone. Calder climbed a ridge to look, returned moments later and said, "I see them. The chief is tied up, sitting against a rock. The 2 white men are fixing their reins. If they planned to take him farther, it was for ransom or to force him to guide them through this land." Evelyn understood the danger immediately. Rushing in would get the chief killed. Attacking head-on would trap him between gunfire. They needed something else. Evelyn suddenly said, "The boy can help." Not by going near them, but by calling to his father. If the chief reacted, they'd know he was conscious, and if there was a trap. Calder knelt before the boy. "Do you want to try?" The child nodded, stepped to the edge of the ridge, and called out in his language. Not a scream, an Apache call full of emotion that carried far into the night. Below, the chief stirred, then lifted his head, answering weakly. The boy cried with relief. Calder's hands clenched. The chief was alive, but instantly the 2 white men jumped up, guns drawn, scanning the darkness. Calder whispered, "They don't know where we are. This is our chance." The Apache warriors tightened around them. The chief was alive but trapped. One wrong move could end everything. Evelyn said softly, "Calder, this is the moment you choose. Not choose whether to fight, but choose whether he would keep running from the past, or finally step into the world that once saved him." the world where a child trusted him, a tribe still believed in him, and a woman now stood beside him in the dark with her hand on his arm. And Calder knew there was no turning back anymore. Calder knew the defining moment had come. There was no room left for old fears or hesitation. He stood on the edge of the ravine with two paths ahead of him. One was safety, the life he built after leaving the tribe, and the other was the man who once saved him and the boy who trusted him with his whole heart. Evelyn placed her hand on his arm and whispered, "You can do this." 3 simple words pulled him out of years of hiding and brought him back to the man of loyalty he once was. Calder turned to the Apache warriors. "Listen to me," he said in their language, steady as stone. "Those two are scared. If we approach with weapons, they'll shoot, and the chief dies first." The older warrior nodded. "Then what is your way?" Calder looked down into the ravine where the chief sat tied to a rock, blurred by dim firelight. "I'll go down alone. I can speak to them. I know how white men think. If I convince them I'm here to negotiate, you'll have time to close in." A young warrior protested, "Too dangerous." Evelyn stepped in calmly. "Calder isn't choosing danger. He's choosing someone worth protecting." The warriors stared at her. One asked, "You trust him that much?" Evelyn answered softly, "I trust him with everything I've seen today." Calder glanced at her, understanding that she had handed him a piece of courage he'd been missing for years. They tied a rope around Calder's waist, and Evelyn gripped the end so tightly her knuckles whitened. When he reached the ground, he lifted his hands high and stepped forward into the firelight so the two men could see him. "Hey!" he called out. The men jerked around, pointing their guns at him. Calder kept his voice level. "I'm not one of their warriors. I just want to talk." "Back up!" one of them barked. Calder stopped. "Listen, you're holding the leader of a large tribe. If you harm him, hundreds will come for you." One man scoffed. "That's why we kept him. Big reward." Calder replied, "He's barely conscious. If you want ransom, you keep him alive." That made them hesitate. Calder pressed on. "Lower your guns. I'll help him stand. I'll make sure you get out of here alive." "Why trust you?" the tall one asked. "Chico, because if I meant to hurt you," Calder said quietly, "I wouldn't have walked out with my hands empty." The truth in his tone made the two men glance at each other. Then, just a little, one lowered his gun. That was all the warriors needed. In complete silence, they appeared behind the kidnappers like shadows. In less than 5 seconds, the weapons were gone, the two men pinned to the ground. Not a shot fired, not a blow wasted. Just precision, speed, and restraint. Calder rushed to the chief, lifting him gently. The man's face was drawn, but his eyes burned steady. In Apache, he whispered, "I knew you would come." Calder's voice broke. "I came too late." "No," the chief answered softly. "You came exactly as before, when it mattered." The older warrior approached and asked, "We will bring these men to your law. But you, will you return with the tribe?" Calder froze. The question sliced straight into the conflict he'd carried for years. He looked up toward the cliffs where Evelyn stood with the boy. She looked down with fear and hope all at once. The boy waved, calling his name. In that single heartbeat, Calder saw his answer. He said in Apache, "I don't belong in one world alone, but I finally found a place where I am not treated as an outsider." His eyes went straight to Evelyn. She pressed her hand over her heart to steady it. The warriors understood. No one mocked him. No one questioned him. They respected his choice the way they would honor any brave man who spoke truth. One placed a hand on his shoulder. Then live that choice well. They led the chief away toward the mountains, and Calder climbed back up the cliff. Evelyn met him the moment he reached the top, her hands cradling his face as she checked for injuries. "Are you all right?" she whispered. Calder gave a tired smile. "I am. Because of you." The boy threw his arms around him, sobbing with relief. Evelyn watched, her heart softening in ways she never expected. She said quietly, "You saved his father, and you saved yourself too." Calder looked at her under the silver moonlight and understood something profound. He would always walk between two worlds, but for the first time, he had found a place that didn't force him to choose. A place called Rose Canyon. And in that place stood Evelyn Hart, her hand still holding his as if she had already decided. He would never walk alone again. The people of the Old West believed that anyone with a good heart, no matter how far they wandered, would someday find their way home. If this story touched you even a little, hit subscribe so that next time another tale from the Wild West rises on the wind, you'll be right here to hear it with me.